Fire washed over Khan's cafe one summer night in 1992, unleashed by a mob of young people who had swept up Balaclava Street in Blackburn to lay siege to the nondescript establishment. The exact story of that riot, like that of most riots, is pretty opaque. In some tellings, it erupted because of a cricket match brawl in which ethnic Punjabi Muslims beat up an ethnic Gujarati Muslim. Others allude to forbidden love between a Gujarati girl and a Punjabi boy. Still others that it had something to do with street gangs. As investigators in two continents now work to piece together what led 44-year-old Malik Faisal Akram to travel across the Atlantic to take hostages at a synagogue in Texas, the story of that riot in his hometown is critical. It helps understand why England's dying industrial towns turned into the Western world's largest jihad factories. 1,400 United Kingdom citizens, almost all second and third generation immigrants, are estimated to have served with the Islamic State in the Middle East. British fighters, one expert wrote, have been found on almost every jihadist battlefield since Afghanistan in the 1970s. How did this all come about? The year after the Blackburn riot, a then unfamiliar preacher from Pakistan arrived at the town's masjid, the center of its mainly Punjabi Pakistani community, on a winding tour which had led him through London's East End and Lancashire's mouldering industrial mill towns. The exact circumstances under which the Jaish-e-Mohammed chief, Masood Azhar Alvi, was granted a visa have never become clear. Its improbable British intelligence in Islamabad had heard nothing of him or his terrorist group's activities. In any case, Azhar left no one in Blackburn in any doubt about his intentions. The youth should prepare for jihad without delay. One tape of his speeches from that tour records. They should get jihadist training from wherever they can. We are also ready to offer our services, he said. The story of Masood Azhar's trip to Britain does not fit the narrative by Muslim community leaders and security experts alike. A BBC documentary noted, according to them, the spread of jihadist ideology in Britain had nothing to do with the UK's mainly South Asian mosques. The source of all the trouble, in their telling, was a bunch of Arab Islamist exiles. That's not quite the truth though. From the end of the Afghan jihad in 1979, Arab jihadists had indeed made London their home under the gaze of its intelligence services. British intelligence may have thought, given the Cold War context, that having these jihadists in the UK provided them useful leverage in West Asia and Pakistan. Even more important was the idea that controlling the mosque leadership and political Islam would help rein in a restive second-generation immigrant cohort. And that led to the birth of something called Londonistan. French intelligence officials had long lectured their British counterparts on the dangers growing up across the English Channel in the city on the Thames. They coined a wry nickname for London, Londonistan. There was, however, method to the apparent madness of the British establishment. In the late 1970s, the time Akram's generation was growing up, race riots exploded across England, centered around unemployed youth in the industrial cities, where Pakistani immigrants had arrived as mill workers in the 1950s. The riots in Blackburn, first Indian and Pakistani Muslims fighting each other, then whites fighting both Indian and Pakistani Muslims, and then all youth joining together to fight the police, sparked fears. There was concern that the white nationalist movement and immigrant rage could even spark off a race war. British authorities responded by seeking to engage immigrant leadership. In the case of Bangladeshi and Pakistani immigrants, successive governments reached out to so-called community leaders, often clerics in mosques or individuals linked to extremist Muslim groups like the Jamaat-e-Islami. Government engaged primarily with extremists, the scholar Michael White has recorded. This was a consequence of its failure to understand Islamist strategies. The mosques and imams, National Advisory Board, and the roadshow put out by various organizations are still dominated by Islamists, he notes. In the 1990s, a new generation of radicals emerging from the mosques rebelled against these brokers by arguing there could be no justice at all in a secular democratic order. The new Islamist cells often represented themselves as a virtuous yet masculine counterpose to gang culture which had flourished. Indeed, some parents even supported their children participating in these Islamist groups, hoping it would keep them off the streets and off drugs. Kenan Malik, a British scholar, noted in a 2011 essay that young British Muslims found themselves, quote, detached from both the religious traditions of their parents, which they often reject, and the wider secular society that insists on viewing them simply as Muslims. A few are drawn inevitably to extremist Islamist groups where they discover a sense of identity and belonging. In other words, a family where they had none. From his pulpit in the Four Feathers Club, Umar Mahmood preached to Richard Reed, who attempted to blow up a transatlantic flight in 2003, and 9/11 conspirator Zacarias Musawi, Bosnian jihad veteran Mustafa Kamel, a Brighton-trained civil engineer and one-time nightclub bouncer, sent volunteers to Yemen, where there's still a civil war going on. The bombing of the Indian Army's headquarters in Srinagar in December 2000, the 2010 9/11 anniversary plot, these all involved elements linked to London-based cleric Umar Bakri Muhammad. England seemed to bring about an almost magical ideological metamorphosis in many young people. London School of Economics graduate Syed Omar Sheikh, the son of an affluent family, became a Jaish-e-Mohammed killer. Dhiren Bharot, son of a rich Gujarati Hindu family, turned into a Kashmir jihadist and Al-Qaeda bomb plot operative. Siddharth Dar into the Islamic State's murderous Jihad Sid. Attacks like the London bombings of 7/7, which claimed 56 lives, have been preempted due to better policing and intelligence. There is, however, a continued steady flow of individual jihadists like Akram. Roshnara Chaudhry stabbed Member of Parliament Stephen Timms in broad daylight. Michael Adebolaho, who hacked to death a British soldier on the streets of southeast London. Cases like this are depressingly common. Like these individuals, Akram had no known affiliation with jihadist groups, either online or physically. He was certainly religious, serving at a local mosque and volunteering like millions of other Muslims with the pietist Tablighi Jamaat, but his activities never attracted the attention of the UK's intelligence services or police. The ideas that led him to violence seem to have seeped into his mind almost by osmosis from his milieu. Ever since the London bombings of 7/7, the United Kingdom has sought to address its jihad problem, cracking down on terrorism suspects and, in parallel, marketing so-called moderate Islam. The gains from this are unclear though. In one survey, 6 out of every 100 British Muslims were reported to support the 7/7 bombings. The following year, another survey found 25 of them believed that attack was a government plot. They'd lapsed into conspiracy theory. Worse, British cities remained profoundly ghettoized. In a 2016 official government report, Louise Casey revealed that, I quote, people of Pakistani and Bangladeshi ethnicity tend to live in more residentially segregated communities than other ethnic minority groups. 50% of school-age children from these communities, she found, studied in institutions where the majority of other students were from the same ethnic group. This is the question of our time, the author Salman Rushdie once asked. How does a fractured community of multiple cultures decide what values it must share in order to cohere? Akram's story is, in the final analysis, a parable of what happens when communities come to define themselves by their differences and their identity congeals into hatred. I'm Praveen Swami. I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint.